we could have been born in any century, in any time, right? But we were born in this particular time, and what were we put on this earth to do in the time that we were born in? And I believe once you find that out, then the sky is the limit. And I think that, why I was put here in this particular time was to go through what I went through, to be able to show people that you can go from that and still be okay.
Welcome, Curtis, to the Anonymous There podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you today, and I think I was telling you off air that I was introduced to you or your story by Amanda Ripley, who wrote the book High Conflict. She was a recent guest on my podcast, Anonymous There, and I was completely intrigued in your story and wanted to get you on here. So it's an honor again to have you, and really, I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation. First, though, I wanted to start with your story. I know it's super powerful, and you've done so much in your life for the community, but you had an interesting beginning to it all. And I just want to kind of back up to where you kind of came from in your upbringing and what happened in your adolescence.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think, my upbringing, what I've grown to learn is not a lot. There's not a lot of differences between my upbringing and a lot of other folks who've come up, in the urban ghettos, if you will. But I'll start by saying I kind of moved around like my family was in the military, but we weren't. My mom just moved to a lot of different communities for various reasons. And so that gave me this kind of outlook on the West and South and the East sides of Chicago, which are all in their own way dynamically unique. And so I always start off by saying, you don't get to choose who your parents are, and your parents don't really get the choice to choose who the kids are. So it's a two-way street there, right? Yeah. And so for me, I think the term that good girls like bad boys was really something that I think that my mom went through, and I think a lot of people go through that. So she had me at a really young age. She probably was about 15, going on 16. And at that time, my dad was one of the founders of a Chicago street gang, and he was relatively young as well. He probably was 16. And so just the dynamic of having, really, really young parents, and they were trying to find their way, but not find their way together. So in just my opinion, my mom had, this way of choosing guys that were a little rough around the edges, including my dad. And so, unfortunately, she chose guys who were really connected to the street life. And so I think that was really my introduction to what I call the other side, or, the underworld, or, gang life, or whatever people may want to label it as, was through first my dad, and then through some of the folks who my mom began to have relationships with.
And did you have siblings shortly thereafter, or are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest. I didn't have siblings until further down the line. I'm probably about 9 years older than my siblings. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So your dad's the leader of a street gang. What gang was it?
The Four Corner Hustler Vice Lords. I wouldn't say he was the leader. He was one of the founding members of it. Yeah.
Got it. So he's the founding member. You're born. So you're kind of born into that life then, right? Essentially.
Yeah. Even though, at that particular time, I didn't understand then, but I understand more now being a parent and being a father who was deeply involved in the street life, what he was going through. Being a kid, I didn't understand why my pops wasn't in my life. But again, now I understand now that, there's this misnomer that when you don't have anything to give your kids, then you kind of shy away or stay away from them. And that's some of the things that my dad went through. And then unfortunately at a very young age, along with a lot of others during that period, that 70s period, you had a lot of folks coming from, like the Vietnam War. My dad wasn't a war vet, but unfortunately he got caught up uh, in that thing where a lot of folks were coming back using heroin, and he became a heroin addict.
Got it. So how was your early life growing up? Because I mean that in itself, that story you just told me is traumatic. But you as a kid, your father is not around. How was the relationship with your mother?
Oh man, me and my mom, by her being a young parent, it seemed like it was more of a, for lack of a better term, brother sister type of relationship, because she was trying to find her way, being such a young parent. And I think I alluded to that. I felt that that she kind of connected with a lot of bad guys, and this one particular guy who she was dealing with at that time. I've grown to find out that he was a pimp and a drug dealer, and you know, he was very abusive to my mom and also myself. And that was really the first time that I ever saw a weapon. He had a Tommy gun under his bed, and I saw it. And being a child, that makes you know, you get intrigued by those things, and then you kind of also start to believe that seeing your mom or seeing other people violently beaten up, or all of these verbal insults, you know, I kind of felt that that may have been the norm, unfortunately, because that's what I grew up around.
And how old were you then when you saw the gun?
I had to be about 7 or 8. Yeah.
And then I imagine from there, she had various boyfriends, or did she stick with that guy for a while?
She was with that guy for a while. And I guess, sometimes you have to be careful for what you pray for, because I prayed for his demise. And, he ended up dying. Um, to
How
this
did he
day,
die?
some folks say from natural cause. I believe he probably had an overdose. I mean, you know what I mean? I was so young and we never really talked about like his death, but he eventually died.
I imagine now, just in the chronological order, now you're 10 years old or
Yeah.
so. So,
Yeah.
so what happens then in your life?
So at this particular age, we're living on the west side of Chicago, and it was this time, where you have this racial divide, unfortunately, within your own community. And what I mean by that is that I was kind of picked on because I was light skinned with curly hair, right? And so I wasn't a violent person at first because I didn't have any older siblings. So I used to take a lot of shit, right? People used to pick on me, even jump on me. And so, I would tell my mom, then I would talk to my cousins and even my grandmother. And unfortunately, as parents, sometimes we give our children the wrong kind of information or concept. So what they told me is that if I couldn't beat them, then to pick up something, right? Because it was more than one. And unfortunately, that went from me, you know, picking up rocks to sticks to hammers to knives, then to guns.
Wow. So then from that point, when you were picking up guns, you weren't even a teenager yet?
No, I
Uh,
wasn't a teenager, and it's ironic. It's kind of funny now that the first gun that I picked up, it was a gun that my grandmother used to have in her drawer, dresser drawer, and I took it out, just clowning around with some of the guys and was shooting it in the air. And then one of my friends was like, "Let me take a shot," right? So he took a shot, and
you were
nothing was
shooting in
coming
the
up.
house or outside? Okay.
Outside in the
Outside,
air.
yeah.
And my friend was like, "Damn it, this is a starter pistol. This isn't a real gun." So my first gun that I thought was a gun wasn't really actually a gun. It was a starter pistol.
Wow. So then at that time, you guys are around kind of playing with this gun. So then how does it evolve from there into other things?
Yeah. And so, like a lot of folks do, I got into trouble that I really didn't have to get into. It was more of me trying to prove myself to the guys that I was hanging out with. So we were poor, but we didn't know it, right? My grandmother had a decent job. So like some of the things that I wanted in life, she was able to give me. So I started what we call snatch and grab on the west side of Chicago, and that was taking the ball bearings out of skates, and they would bust windows easily for some reason. Like when you throw the ball bearing, it would shatter a window, and we would snatch purses. And so I think that was really my introduction to the crime life, if you will, was what we call snatch and grab.
And you were just then a teenager, right, at the time?
Still not a teenager at this time.
Okay.
I'm probably 11 and had joined my first street gang.
Got it. And how do you go about joining a street gang at 11?
At this particular time, they had this thing where they handcuffed me to like a small tree. They beat my chest up pretty bad, and then they had me fight my friend who was older than me, and he kind of got the best of me. Then I fought a couple more guys, and then I was kind of jumped in. Yeah.
Got it. And what street gang was that at the time?
It was the same street gang that my father was one of the founding members of. Yeah.
Did you have street cred knowing that? I mean, people knew he was the founder of it, and that it was
You
your
know what?
father. Or no?
I didn't mention that a lot back then. You know what I mean? I really didn't even mention who my dad was or what his position was coming up, because probably because he wasn't in my life like that. But one thing that I can say is that he kind of was in my life vicariously, like through my grandmother. She would buy me bikes and things and say it was from him. So that was the connection that he kind of kept with me, and he would pop by, every now and again. And so, yeah, yeah,
Now in the street gang, yeah,
hmm
it's official.
yeah,
You're snatch and grab.
hmm
How's the crime or the series of things the gang does evolve?
it took a while for things to evolve for me, as it relates to really when you think about the crime element of it. And so just fast forward a few years. So then my mom meets this other guy through her best friend at work. Uh, and ironically, he was serving time in a federal institution for bank robbery. Uh, and when I first met him, he was like this behemoth of a guy. I mean, he probably lifted everything on a weight pound. This really big guy. And she eventually married him, and he was my stepfather. And I thought things were, would be different, but unfortunately they weren't. He was also violent towards her and myself as well. Um, and so now we've moved from the west side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago, and I'm going through this physical and verbal abuse stuff all over again with a totally different guy. And I had this misnomer in my mind that one day I could be bigger than him to, and kind of defeat this guy. And so I would collect cans and bottles and turn them in for money. And I got enough money, and I bought this really small weight set. And our apartment was small as well, so I had to put the weight set in my kitchen. So I would be lifting these weights in the kitchen, in my mind, thinking that one day I would be stronger than my stepdad. And so I was out with some friends out south, and we were just riding our bikes, and we rode past this place, and it looked like a theater from the outside. And I saw this man who was surrounded by other men, and you could just tell the way that they were formed, that they were his security. And he was in front of this black Cadillac, and he was huge as well. And so in my mind, I was like, this guy here could defeat my stepdad, right? Who is him? Who is this guy? Not who is him.
Yeah.
Who is this guy? And so I wanted to learn more about him. And so I just started, asking people that were around who he was, and he was a guy who eventually became the leader of another organization who I became a part of, and his name was Jeff Fort, the founder of the Black Peace Stones, and at that particular time was an El Rukin. So I joined the El Rukins at probably about 12 or 13 years old.
So how does that work? You just switch from one gang to the next?
So officially, me being so young, I probably was never a part of the other gang, right?
Got it.
Officially, it was like
Yeah.
unofficial that I was a part of this other thing. But this was an official thing. We had to attend meetings. That was a criteria. And another thing is that this group had a strong Islamic undertone or overtone to it as well. And so that was one of the things that kind of drew me in. And, I think there's this other misnomer that folks, were thinking that the older guys were having us do these violent acts of crime. But for me, being a part of the El Rukins, that was totally different. They made sure I went to school. They made sure I went to football practice and all those kind of things. So this became like my family, my second family. And then, people all over knew that the El Rukins didn't take shit either, right? And so that was kind of like this garment of protection that I felt that I had with this organization.
Do you remember your first time meeting Jeff?
Uh, it was ironic because I never met him in person. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested for conspiracy against the United States of America.
So he's arrested for conspiracy that had to do something with the gang violence or drugs, or what was it?
I mean, I think it was a combination of all. It was not only conspiracy; it was conspiracy and terrorism against the United States of America. He was convicted and tried for having a deal with Muammar Gaddafi, saying that that our group would blow up downtown Chicago or something like that. And one of the people who were affiliated with the El Rukins was caught buying a rocket launcher.
Wow. And is that anything you fathomed at the time, or did you realize the scale of that when you were younger? Because I imagine like you're joining this gang,
Mm-hmm.
you look up to this guy, you're kind of joining it for reasons to protect yourself and your family from your now stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
So all good reasons, and then all of a sudden you find out that the leader of this gang is essentially a conspiring to be a terrorist. Like, what was going through your mind then?
If that part of it was actually going on, they kind of kept that away from us. You know what I mean? And so what happened was that all of the leadership, I think it was about 30 plus guys were locked up in this conspiracy and this terrorism, this terrorism act. And so what it did is something that's happening that we see here in Chicago now, is that it left us to be in leadership. And we're 16-year-old kids, right? Now we've become the leaders of this organization, if you will. And that didn't go so well. I mean, to a certain degree, it was okay. But now that I look back on it, I think that we are some of the reasons for a lot of the violence that's going on today here in Chicago.
So before I ask how that changed, just out of curiosity, were gangs different back then in the sense that the leadership wanted you to go to school, wanted you to be a good citizen? Like how is it morphed from what it was then to what it is today?
And when I look back, being like this quote unquote gang historian, it seems like every time that drugs came into play, there was this shift. So even when you think about, the El Rukins, when they were first the Black Stone Rangers, and then you had the group who eventually became our rivals were the Black Disciples or the Black Gangster Disciples. There was this, if you noticed in everything, or every name that I gave, black was in the front of it. So there was this real sense of pride in the Black Power movement. So, and it was just a way, really, at first, that they were founded on, really to protect their communities. And then, when like I said, in the '70s, when the heroin and stuff started to come in, I think that's when some of the trajectory started coming in, because there was money and stuff being brought in through the drug trade. And then, with us, when I think about the late '80s, early '90s, when the crack epidemic kind of hit, that's when our kind of ideology of what the organization was founded on kind of shifted.
Got it. And does that, right around that time, you guys find yourself as leaders of the gang? How does the leadership mindset change? Is it now all about the drug trade, and is it more violent, or how is that different?
Yeah, I think it was some of all of that kind of wrapped up in everything, right? You got to think that, first of all, that we're these young kids with all of this kind of stuff thrown on top of us. Now, there was always this kind of street or gang war between the folks and the People Nation, right? That's the 5-point star and the 6-point star. There was always this kind of feud or this rival since the early '60s, right? So we took on that banner, or we took on that war. On top of, now we're getting lump sums of money from the illegal drug trade, and we also are able, now we're bringing weapons into this, and now we're fighting over drug turf. We're fighting these crazy drug wars, and we're still these young kids, right? And so that's what happened in the '90s. And when you look at statistics, and it's nothing that I'm, bragging on, but that was one of the highest murder rates that we've ever seen in Chicago, was when I was, in leadership, part of leadership of one of the Chicago street gangs here.
And just as the Chicago street gangs were emerging, was the organized crime, like as far as the mob, was there any contact with those two groups, or was that fading out? Like, how did that work?
That was fading out. Early on, there was a lot of contact, when you think about that. But by the time I started getting more deeper involved, our thing was more with the Colombian drug cartel.
Got it. So you had direct ties with the cartel?
Yes.
There. And then were other gangs emerging at that time?
Yes. All of us were partaking in a whole lot of violence, and a whole lot of drugs were coming into our communities.
And then, but because of the drug trade, was that creating other gangs, like rival gangs?
So there were always rival gangs, right? It was always the People Nation versus the Folks Nation. And at that time, it was probably 10 or 15 subgroups in both that kind of made this big collaborative, if that makes sense, on both sides. So there was always this kind of tension and friction, in Chicago between these two different superpowers, which were the People and the Folks Nation. But, once more money began to get involved, it seems like the more violent all of us began to become.
So when you hear something like the Crips and the Bloods and the Latin Kings, like, are they all subgroups under one of those two, between the People and the Folks Nation, or how does that work?
No. So the Crips and the Bloods never really made their way to Chicago, because we were already organized here. So we never let the Crips or the Bloods in. Now, the Latin Kings is actually the first cousins. We call them our first cousins of the group that I was a part of. So they were under the People Nation's banner.
Got it. And what other groups, what are other cousins or subgroups are under, like, the People's Nation?
The People's Nation was, so you had vice lords, and you had different branches of vice lords: the travelers, the unknowns, the conservatives, the Black P Stones, or the Black Stone Rangers, the Latin Kings. Those were like probably the biggest when you think about the People's Nation. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. Vice Lords, Stones, Latin Kings. And then on the other side, you had the Disciples, the black gangsters, and you had the gangster disciples, uh, Spanish disciples, and a few others.
Got it. So this is just extremely curious. I'm extremely curious about this because on one sense, I didn't grow up too far from this, but it seems like another world, right?
Hmm.
Just kind of where the proximity of where I lived. The groups now, so there are the subgroups. Was there like ever a large meeting with all the groups together that represented the People's Nation, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah, but they were more aligned in the prison system than on the streets.
Mm.
Because on the streets, we would have these feuds amongst each other a lot sometimes. You know what I mean? But in the prison system, they were more aligned than on the streets.
What would cause the feuds?
Turf, you know, a lot of misunderstandings, or if women, so
Yeah,
some of those were some of the major things that caused a lot of the feuds.
I
And just ego a lot of times, a lot of just
right.
bravado, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
when you say turf, is it someone's like walking in the territory or selling drugs in a territory? Like
Yeah,
what is it?
trying to, we call it set up shop. You have folks, people. And when I say people and folks, I'm not referring to the actual gang alliance, but you have people that would come into a different neighborhood and try to start selling drugs, or come into a different neighborhood and start talking to some of the women that's in that neighborhood, or just have an argument with someone who was a part of another organization, and that would cause those are some of the things that would cause these gang feuds.
Got it. So you're now emerging as this leader.
Hmm.
You're the guy that you wanted to kind of be your mentor is in prison,
Hmm.
or he's obviously indicted by
Yes,
by the
he's
federal
in
government. So
prison.
he's doing his thing. Okay.
Hmm.
Do you now find a different mentor, or how do you evolve your leadership at that point?
So uh, I need to step back for just a moment. So I know you probably read in the book, or that my stepfather ends up killing my mom, and I find her in the garage. Um, at this particular time, and I always said no counselor or nobody showed up at my door to give me what I needed for that trauma that I was experiencing with the loss of
And
my mom.
you were how old then, Curtis?
Oh, probably 16.
I'm so sorry that happened. By the way, I know you're going to
Yeah,
get into it. I'm sorry.
yeah, and it changed. I was already going through a lot of this physical and verbal abuse and trauma, and now my best friend is gone. And she's taken away from me violently. Um, and so there was a period of time that I felt that I didn't have anything to live for. Uh, and so I became extremely violent to any and everyone. Like, I just took on this whole different character and personality shift. And so, with that being said, uh, probably a year after, almost a year after my mom was killed, I was engaged in this street war on the streets, and I was shot in the head. Um, that was the first. No, that was the third time I was shot, when I got shot in the head. So I had been shot twice before that, and this is my third time being shot, and I was shot in the head, and it was you know pretty bad at the time, but I was able to overcome it. A lot of my friends, give me a lot of. They make these jokes and they call me kind of shit faced, and it's because they took a skin graft from my ass to do plastic surgery and put it on, on my
Oh my God.
head. So I had to endure some of that a little bit, um, and then shortly thereafter, I went to a maximum penitentiary for what was that? I think it was first degree attempted murder. And here I am, this young guy now in a maximum penitentiary, which was Stateville at the time.
And you were how old at that time? 17?
17, yeah, 17, 18.
So,
Yeah.
so I can't just gloss over the fact that you were shot 3 times and now this time in the head. Do you remember that, or was it, did you just black out for a period of time after that?
No, I remember it.
You do?
I remember it. Yeah, I never, and it's crazy because I made it my business not to lose consciousness because I believe that I believe it was because I saw all these films and they're like, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep, and slapping people on the face when they get shot. So I can remember seeing that. So in my mind, I was like, I'm not going to lose consciousness. I can remember laying on the porch and the officers came. And when they came, I guess I was bleeding so bad that I just started to, pass out a little bit. And I could hear them talking, saying that we could write this guy off. And I immediately, opened my eyes back up. So I remember pretty much everything. I can also remember being an idiot and going to the hospital and arguing with some of the folks that were working on me because they were cutting. I had just bought a new outfit, so they were cutting my pants. And I was like, damn it, I'm not shot down there. You don't have to cut my pants. You know what I mean? But now I know that they were just trying to see, did I have any other bullet wounds anywhere else?
Right. So were you just on your porch walking outside? Like, what time of the day was it when that happened?
This had to be high noon, and we had got into this conflict with this other gang, which I thought was resolved, and I thought that we were meeting to kind of advocate for this peace thing amongst us. And what ended up happening was another young man who wasn't privy to the meeting, who was a part of my organization, kind of saw us walking down the street, and he wasn't for no peace at that particular time, and he started opening fire on the other group, and they started opening fire on me because I was the closest to him.
Wow. So then when something like that happens, you're in the hospital, you wake up, are you just, after you're recovered, are you handcuffed to the bed?
Yeah, I was handcuffed for a moment, and then eventually, they didn't have enough to keep me in custody, right. And my friends actually came and broke me out of the hospital.
What?
Yeah, I mean, when
what
I think
about
some of the dumb stuff that I was doing and that we were doing, man, they came and my head is all wrapped up and shit. I haven't even had the surgery yet. And they're like, man, we got to get you up out of here before, the police come back. And also there was this big party that was going on that I felt that I had an obligation to attend. So I go to the party, bullets still in my head. And guess what? We get into a damn fight, man. And I just think about how dumb that was now, Yeah.
Wow.
And my auntie was so mad at me because she was a nurse at the hospital at that particular time. And she was calling around like, where are you? You got a damn bullet in your head. You gone? I'm like, yeah, I'll be back.
So what happened after the fight? Did you end up going back to the hospital?
I probably went back to, my aunt convinced me to come back to the hospital. It probably was about 2 or 3 days later. And then they did the surgery. I mean, the ironic thing about it is that I found out is that, one of the hardest parts on your body is your knee, your elbow. And then that part right over your eye is really, really hard, right? And so what happened is that the bullet entered there and it took away a lot of the velocity of it by going through that really hard part right over the top of my eye. So it just landed right behind there. And, they eventually took it out. They had to do plastic surgery. But, I think they did a good job, if I could say so myself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. So then, I mean, we could spend all day just on that scene,
Yeah.
but I know we don't have all day. So what happens from there? Now you're having surgery at the hospital. When do you, is there a gap in time
Not
before
really.
you get arrested? Or
probably about 60 days. 60 days after that, I'm arrested, and I was supposed to be going to this medium institution because of my age at that time, but we end up having this big gang fight in what we call the chow hall. That's like the lunchroom, and in a penitentiary, and they removed me. And this is when I know things started getting real, because they put me in segregation. And I had a cellie in seg, and they would give out these bags, and on the bag it would have like this letter and this number, and that would represent where you're going. And so I was like, man, I'm going to a minimum institution. And he was like, let me see your bag. And I think the bag said K5. And he was like, nah, you're going to the big house, buddy. And I'm like, why? Why am I going there? And so I went in front of the administration, and, they had like this hearing, and they said that I was being charged with exciting a riot and also being a leader of a street gang. And so I couldn't go to a minimum institution. I had to go to a maximum.
Before you ended up in that place, did you know the police were looking for you? Were you hiding out, or did they catch you by surprise?
I kind of knew they were looking for me, but I ended up catching a whole nother case. Yeah, I caught another case, and they kind of combined the two, and then I did what you call a plea deal, which a lot of black and brown folks do. We don't go to trial. They bring us an offer, we take it, and that's what ended up happening.
Wow. So you brought in the station, then the detectives talked to you, or DA, and then all of a sudden you're in jail. Is that kind of how it?
Yeah, in
went?
the county. Yeah, now I'm in the county jail with no bond, and then I'm shipped off.
So what's the significance now between medium security, the smaller penitentiary, or the medium-sized one, versus maximum, the one now you're going into?
Just the amount of violence and the convictions and the people that are there. I can remember my mother telling me, "You're crazy to retrospect, But you do stuff that's crazy in retrospect." And I had no idea who retrospect was, but I got a chance to see him in Stateville, and that was, one of the scariest people that I think that I've ever saw in my life. And I came up thinking that I was a kind of tough guy, but there was this look of just horror or terror when I got a chance to see him. And then,
for those that don't know, what did he do?
Richard Speck, he's the one that killed a lot of nurses in Chicago. He was a serial killer. Yeah.
That's crazy. So now you find yourself in a prison. You're 17 years old. You're with one of the most notorious serial killers in that day.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind then?
Man, how did I end up here? But I still couldn't, show that I was actually afraid. I ended up, befriending a guy who was a part of my organization as well. And his sentence was natural life in 20 years. So that meant they wanted him to die. And if he came back to life, he would still have to do 25 years. So he eventually became like my mentor while I was in there. Kind of saved my life because I went in there, with these really, really hardened guys as a young guy coming off the street, saying that I was a shot caller. And, that didn't go too well with the folks who were already in the prison system. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's a shot caller mean?
Meaning a person. So I was running my particular organization on the streets. Right. And so
you're
a lot of
shots,
times,
essentially.
Yeah. So a lot of times, especially being as young as I was at that particular time, it doesn't transfer over to the institution.
Right. So now you're in there. There's a whole other hierarchy, mm-hmm. right in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And do you feel like, are people looking at you like you need to kind of start over and prove yourself in there? Like how's that work?
Exactly that. Exactly that. I ended up being the guy who I just referenced. I ended up being his personal security while I was there. Yeah. And so that was a little different.
What does that mean? That you're just with him as much as you can be?
Yeah,
looking out?
yeah, yeah. So I was his personal security. So everywhere he went, I had to go. He had a job in the visiting room as the cameraman. So at that particular time, the inmates kind of ran the jail, and so I would be allowed to come pick him up, to take him to work, and also come pick him up from work. Without being searched or anything. So that was just the kind of how the system went at that particular time.
And was he trying to reform his life at the time? And was he giving you any sort of positivity in your life? Besides, was he a mentor, I guess, in a good sense, or a mentor in the sense of he was teaching you the ropes of how the prison system worked?
I think both. I think one of the things that he did, instill in me is that I didn't have to be this wild, off the chain kind of kid to get stuff done, right? He would tell me that, I didn't have a whole lot of time to do. And the best thing that I could do was leave and be alive, you know. And so he did give me a lot of instruction on that. He gave me a lot of good life lessons, but he didn't tell me not to be a part of the organization anymore. And so what eventually happened is that I end up having some juice right from the street, not really sanctioned by anyone to a certain degree, but sanctioned by some folks, going to the prison, kind of reclaiming my status in prison and being released with more status than I had before I went in.
So, so then how does your time in prison evolve?
I didn't do that much time. I did about 2 years on that bit. So it evolved, and it also gave me a position that was backed by everyone that was a part of the organization, if that makes sense. So now I have the blessings, if you will, of the hierarchy to go out onto the streets with this power or this rank.
At that point, were you thinking at all about changing your life and doing something different and getting out?
No, I was really thinking about trying to get to an institution where my stepdad was, to kill him.
I was going to ask you
Or
about that.
yeah, that really was my driving my driving force. I never ran into him. I think he had a block that we couldn't be in the same institution. Um, and so yeah, I thought a little bit about doing something different, but at that particular time, being in the gang or the street culture was my identity.
So I don't forget to ask, whatever happened to him?
Um, he was tried and convicted and given about 25 years for murder and robbery.
So is he still in prison today?
No.
So then you get out, you're trying to get back in to find him essentially, and you're now at an elevated position. What
Mhm.
happens next?
So during the time that I was in, some of the guys who I knew or became really close friends with were now heavy into the narcotics trade. And he was kind of running this particular area, and I was kind of like his, in the mob terms, consigliere or the underboss when I got out. And then he was killed, and I took over his position.
Wow. So you're rising the ranks, and then was there any time at that point, or was it that you thought, like, I guess, like, at what point then? Now you're what, like just under 20, or you're around 20 years
Yeah,
old?
I'm around 20. Yeah, yeah.
When I imagine, like, just there's an evolution of things that continue to happen around the
Hmm.
same Is anything different happen around that time, or is it just more of the same?
It's kind of more of the same. You know, really violent. I'm running this particular area. Um, but then my son is born. Um, and that's, I think, the first time that I kind of actually started to think a little differently. Because I thought that he actually was coming to replace me because he looked so much like me. He looked so much like me that I thought he was my replacement. So I actually thought that I was gonna have an untimely death.
So you're 21 when you have them, or
Yeah, 21, about 21.
okay.
Yeah,
And then at that
yeah.
point, you start to think about how to reform your life, or when does that start?
I started thinking about it a little bit. I think the things that I started to do was be less violent, but then I end up getting a drug and a gun charge, and I go back to jail. I go back to prison.
And how did that feel? Do you recall at the time, like knowing you were a new father and not being able to see your kid? Was that wearing on you?
Oh man, yeah, it felt terrible, man. I was like, shit, you know. And so I get another short bit, like three. I think they gave me like 3.5 years. You know, during that time, you know, and it's one thing that being involved in narcotics and the street life. We knew that if we had money and we had a good lawyer, that we would, in our minds, we would be okay. And so I ended up being okay. I ended up only getting like 3.5 years and doing about 2 years off of that bit and coming back home. And so when I came home on this particular time, I thought in my mind that I really wanted to do something different. So I ended up getting a job at not Renter Center, Aaronson's Furniture, which is a furniture place.
Yep.
And I was doing pretty good. I was doing okay. But then a group of young ladies came in, and I can remember it as if it were yesterday. And they started laughing and cracking jokes, and my pride, you know, was just shot. And like, you used to be running shit, now you running furniture, you know. And I kind of let that get the best of me, and I quit my job and went back to the drug trade.
Now, when you had that job, were you still technically in the gang, or how does that work?
I was technically in by title, if that makes sense, but I wasn't. I was still going, visit the guys, hang out with them, give some sense of leadership, but I wasn't as involved, if that makes sense, at that particular time. Yeah, I
Is,
was kind of distancing myself.
is there a feeling at that time that it's mandatory to be involved? Like, do you feel like that there's, like, is there a way out? It almost seemed like there could have been a way out, but
Hmm.
because of what happened, there wasn't, or because of what happened, you went back. Is that is that factual? Like, is it easy to get out of a gang in that regard? Like, you can just start working and just kind of fade out and not have to be a part of it anymore?
For some, it is. For others, it's a lot. It's a lot more intricate and a lot more, difficult. I mean, but for me, getting in the ranking position that I was in, and knowing, a lot of the guys who were in the hierarchy, you know, a lot of them were okay with me doing something different. You kind of know what I mean? They were like, okay, we get it, but then there was also this tug of war with me, feeling that if I left, and, I could be honest and candid with you, sometimes I still get that feeling to this day that, that I have this obligation to these folks who looked up to me, and I didn't want to let them down. And I saw the direction that they were going in, and like I say, there was this kind of pull between good and bad, that was happening with me. But I was still heavily involved, in the drug trade. Then I kind of shifted that uh, a little bit. Um, and the folks around me were getting indicted. And so here again, I'm thinking that, I had set in my mind that I'm about to go back to prison. I was always a studier of the law. So I figured that if I was indicted on what I felt that I would be indicted on, that I probably could cop a plea for about 10 years in the federal system and do about 8.5. So I had put my mind to that this was what was going to happen. And my son probably was graduating third or fourth grade. It was, he was really young. He was singing this song by Chicago. You're the meaning in my life. You're the
He was singing it to
inspiration.
you?
No, they were on stage. The whole group of them were
Oh,
singing
got it.
this song.
Yeah.
And this thing, man, just came over me. It was like, what am I doing? Like, like I'm just gonna keep repeating the cycle. My grandfather was a convicted felon. My father was a convicted felon. He was a gang leader. My grandfather had been shot. My father had been shot in the head before I'd been shot. And I was just like, when is this shit going to ever end? And I don't want this to be the outcome for my son. And I called my cousin, who was part of this thing with me, and I told him that I was done. And he didn't believe me. He asked me, like, what's up? So he's waiting for me to say this code. So we had this kind of code that if any one of us was ever caught, that we would give this code word, and that meant to get rid of the stuff and get out of there, get little. He was like, what's the code? Yeah. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. And he was like, I can't believe you set me up like this. I was like, no, there's nobody on the other end. I'm not caught. I'm just done, you know? And I was never under investigation. This was all in my mind. I started, trying to, or would you say, do the right thing, but it was extremely hard because I still was trying to keep up this different persona. I had all these cars and, different properties that I own, but I wasn't able to pay the bill. So now these cars are being repossessed. I'm getting, eviction notices. And lo and behold, my cousin pops back up. And he's like, man, we miss you. We need you to come back. And he was like, I got something for you in the trunk. And he had just bought the new S550 Benz. And I was like, shit, man, And I was like, you know what, cuz I'm done. And he was like, man, you're a better man than I am. And I was like, no, I'm just ready and you're not. And so that weekend he was kidnapped and killed. And from that point on, I knew that I had made the right decision.
Whoa. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing and being so candid, Curtis. That's incredible. So then at that point, do you just start continuing down the path? Do you get a job? How does that work?
I end up, being incarcerated, and then from having a little weight set in the kitchen from a little kid, I always kind of, kept in shape. So a friend of mine said that we could start personal training. So we started doing a lot of that, and that was, doing okay. And then I got a call from this agency called, it was Ceasefire at the time. And they were this nonprofit group that was doing violence prevention and intervention. And I started, working with them. And then I eventually got a call from Father Michael Flager because there was this big war going on between the organization that I used to be a leader of and a couple more organizations. And they were in this 4-block radius of each other. And I mean, it was like the Wild Wild West. They were just shooting and killing each other. So he said, did he think that I could get my guys together? And I said, I believe I could. And so we came up with the idea to do this peace basketball league. We ended up getting Derrick Rose, Isaiah Thomas, and a few other people on board. A lot of people didn't think it would work. But from that point on, I said to myself that there is a place for me in the world that I could take the experience and the background that I had doing bad things and convert that energy into others to try to convince them to do something different. And Father Flager ended up giving me a job. And from that point on, I've been, in this violence prevention and intervention field.
So do you feel like that was the key, like finding your purpose and finding your why to turn it all around?
Yeah, that was it, right? And then being able to be the father instead of the gang leader, right? I was able to, I was able to go into a whole different character, right? And that felt good. And then being able to have something, to have another mission that I was aligned to was really helpful in my growth and in my process out of the gang culture.
Then at that time, did you have any more children? Because I know you have, what, 4 now?
Yeah, I have 4 now. So right after I had my son, I had my daughter. I was incarcerated, got out. Then I had another daughter. So all of them, are by my wife. All my kids are by my wife. And so, yeah. So
Did it
things
change
go.
having a little girl?
It did, man, because I was like, man, this is the get back for all the wrong that I've been doing, not only to my wife, but to all the other girls in the process of me coming up, but it changed. And it was, again, I was a father, I didn't have to be, a gang leader anymore, and that felt really, really good. And then also doing the work and being able to try to help others do something different, you know, is very, inspiring. And like you said, once you find your why, then you're not actually working anymore. You're just doing what you believe you were put on
Yeah.
earth to do.
So did that work that you did with Michael Flagger, did that then move into the work you're doing now with Chicago Cred, or how did
Yeah,
those two things merge?
yeah. So Arnie Duncan at that particular time was still with the Obama administration as the Secretary of Education. And Father Mike said he had someone who wanted to meet me, and it was Arnie, and we were talking. And at that particular time, I just thought it was another politician coming to talk to me and trying to get my guys in the community that I were in for a voters block, right? Because we had been let down before by other politicians. And so we had this conversation. He said that, that he would be back and that he wanted to do something around violence prevention and intervention. Would I be interested in doing something like that? I said, yeah, sure. But I didn't think that he was actually, going to come back. And, a year or so later, he came back and offered me a position with Chicago Cred.
That's great. And so do you spend a lot of your days now with talking to folks in gangs, trying to create peace, or is it people that are getting out and you're helping them stay on the right path?
No, I'm talking with those who are actually still heavily involved in trying to create what we call non-aggression agreements, and hoping that a non-aggression agreement would lead to a peace treaty. And so what a non-aggression agreement is just actually getting folks to agree on a set of terms, if you will, during a street war, right? Whether the terms be if anyone makes it to this park, they're off limits. If I'm walking with my son or my grandmother, we're off limits. Or we'll all just play defense instead of offense, meaning we'll stay on our side and you guys stay on your side. Unfortunately, folks shouldn't have to live like that, but that's some of the strategies that we have to use if we want to see a peaceful neighborhood.
And do you find those when someone signs those agreements or agrees to them, are they abiding by them?
Some do and some don't, and then some agreements get broken. I guess that's the same thing that will happen with any kind of agreement. Unfortunately, with ours,
Yeah.
people lose their lives. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question was more about, do you find that those have become effective and that have created change?
Yeah, Sometimes it does. I would be, you know, fooling myself if I said that all of them, worked. Uh, but we try to get, guys and girls to come to some type of agreement or some type of resolution that they don't have to coexist in the same space, but they have to coexist, if that makes sense. And when you think about in a lot of these conflicts, there's been a lot of bloodshed and a lot of death to get folks to that position that they'll take a defensive approach as opposed to an offensive approach. Sometimes really, really, really difficult. But I think we're doing an okay job at it here.
And I thought I heard you say somewhere, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on social media and how that's affected things. Because you were saying back in the day, a lot of the reasons were either girls or
Yeah,
ego, but now I could see social being a big part of that.
yeah, it's if not the biggest reason, one of the biggest reasons that a lot of these conflicts occur is because you can be really tough and be whoever you want to be and say whatever you want to say behind a keyboard, if you will. And folks don't take real kindly, unfortunately, their mindset is at a place where they don't take kindly to any kind of disrespect. And so there's the disrespect of the organization or the crew that they're currently in. And what really drives it is the disrespect of the dead, which we see a lot of, unfortunately. And let me go back a little bit to kind of give you a landscape of what's happening here. So when I was out doing my thing in the street life, there were about 20 groups or 20 groups that combined to make these super groups. So now there's an estimated 2,000 different groups here in Chicago that really don't have an alliance to anything. They're all their own little clique. They have some alliances with some groups, but there's no structure there. So then they could easily become foes instead of allies. And so that's what's making this thing really, really complicated is, just the amount of different crews and cliques on top of a lot of drug use, on top of a lot of damn big guns.
Yeah, that's fascinating how much that has changed.
Yeah.
So what do you like, how do you even create the strategies to evoke change then?
Yeah, that's something that we ask each other and ourselves, every day. When you think about it, a person is shot here in Chicago every 2 hours. Um, but this is not a new dilemma, right? We haven't been under 400 homicides since 1965 here in Chicago, right? So this is not new. But without the ability to go with a per se one or two people that's actually in a leadership role to kind of calm things down makes it a lot more difficult. When there's no what we call rules of engagement, it makes it a lot more difficult. Like I say, I call it, when I was around, I called it organized chaos. I call this unorganized chaos, right? Uh, and so every day we're coming up, hopefully with innovative and new strategies to help, you know, kind of calm some of these street wars. And all of them are different. All of them started from different reasons. Some have been going on for generations. Some are new. Some are really, really petty, and people are still losing their lives. So you have to come up really for a strategy, a different strategy for each one of these conflicts.
Do you find the median age of the gang members has changed over time?
Yes and no, because different, every group has a different makeup. Some groups are really, really young. I mean, from 10 We're working with a few groups now who the leader is 15 or 16, and then you still have some groups that still have some form of structure, and those are some that that are still holding on to some of the perimeters of the old gang culture. Um, so it varies, it varies.
So, what is like at 10 years old? That's so young. And when I think
Hmm.
back to your story, it almost feels like you didn't have a chance. You
Hmm.
were born into this and you were just doing what kids do, but you were just around certain things that were influencing you in ways you didn't know until it was kind of too late. I mean, decades later,
Hmm.
right? Is that what, like, how soon should you be catching this or giving kids a chance? Or, like, said differently, like, how do you break this cycle of, if it's hitting someone at 10 years old, when do you have to get in front of it to be effective?
Preschool, right? Because it's one thing that, I think you and I can agree on is that behavior is learned, right?
Right.
So the quicker that you can unlearn a learned behavior, the easier it is, if that makes sense, And so, and then when you think about, and I talk to some of the young folks that I deal with all the time, and some of the other people that's working with them, is that being at such a young age, you haven't even found the things that's worth living for yet, right? You haven't really experienced anything. So when you're dealing with, no matter how old you are, when you're dealing with someone that feels that they don't have anything to lose, it makes it a lot more different. So what we have to do is instill to them that they're worth living, that they are, that they are valuable, and there are things that's worth living for, and the things that are worth living for are more valuable than what you think is worth dying for, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because in their
Yeah.
mind, they're willing to die for their friend, for their block, you know, because now we're living in a world of popularity, right? Who's the most popular? Who gets the most likes on Instagram or Snapchat? And so, unfortunately, not only here in Chicago, but in a lot of the other urban communities, the most popular people are the ones who have the most bodies under their belt, right? So uh, instead of inspiring, like for me, I had you know pimps, players, drug dealers, and gang leaders to look up to, whatever that consisted of. So now these young brothers and sisters look up to the people who are the most violent. So that's what they're aspiring to be.
I can't help but also think the people that do find themselves in a situation where they were like you in their early 20s thinking like, how did I get here?
Hmm.
How much how much of a part does hope play? Does like the realistic view of like there's another alternative? Like, do people feel like at that point, because it I mean, you kind of even said it, like you had at the time a path to mentor others and to create your why.
Hmm.
But if others found purpose,
Hmm.
how would that change the current environment?
Oh man, that you hit it right on the head, right? And that's what I find myself doing, and I know others that's also doing the work. We're trying to give hope to the hopeless, right? We're trying to say that there's another way, even though it may not seem like that. And I don't come in saying if I change, you can change, but that is possible. But there are different roads that people have to take within their journey. And I tell people, just because I bumped my head and went to prison and did all that, hopefully I can be an example that you don't have to do the same thing, right? And like I said, you hit it right on the head, like to give them a sense of hope when a lot of them feel hopeless.
How do you do that though? Like how can you, because it's one thing to say to someone, there's another path, but when they're actually that day one, when they go to work at the furniture store and they feel this sense of like, I don't have my crew anymore. I don't have my people around me, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen that be successful with other people?
So the first thing that I feel you have to do is the self differentiation. I mean, how can I separate myself from the group dynamic, right? And some people are able to do that, but then you have others that just the separation of them from their group won't work. So then what I have to think of is, how do I change the dynamic of the group, right? Being involved in a group or organization or whatever you want to call it is not a bad thing. I think it's inherently in our DNA to want to be a part of something, right? So now what I have to work on doing is change the dynamics of the entire group, right? How can I shift the thought process or the mindset of this entire group that they don't have to be as violent as they are? And so if I can change the dynamic of the group, then that makes it a lot easier for me to be able to start what we call a self-differentiation process. Because there's one thing that we know is that, I don't want to say unfortunately, because again, all groups are not bad. It's just the people or the things that they're doing are bad, right? Groups are not going anywhere. That's just going to happen. But what they're doing inside of the group, I think, is the thing that we can change.
And it seems like the group that is at most risk to me is, and you could, I'm just guessing here by a conversation, is the group between like, the 10 years old to 20, right? Where you don't, your brain's still developing and you don't really see a way out. I think when you're past 20, maybe you start maturing, you have other life things happen. Like in your case, you had a child. Before then, you're kind of brought up. You don't have no control over your environment, who your parents are, all those things that you mentioned. So I guess starting from before 10, pre-10, so preschool, like you'd mentioned, are there programs right now that you're a part of or that that are going on to help those kids?
Yeah. A friend of mine who's doing a phenomenal job. I can't even think of the name of the program, but they're actually starting to work with preschoolers and their families, right? Because again, what we're talking about is generations of folks who've been involved in this street culture. And so that's another approach that we also take, is that we have to do this this family this family structure. And what I mean by that is that just by working with the child doesn't work if we're going to send them into the same environment every day.
Yeah,
So
and
what
it's not
we're
like they
trying
would
to do,
even know,
yeah,
as a preschooler.
exactly. Yeah. And I'm not only talking about preschool, I'm talking about even the young men and women that we're working with now. We
Correct.
found
Yeah.
that, that we have to work with the whole family systems and their whole social network if we really want to see sustainable change.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So then kind of going back to what I was saying, that
Mhm.
is that like true? Like that the biggest at-risk group right now, the hardest to change is between that kind of 10 to 20-year-old range. Is that a thing or?
Oh yeah, that is definitely a thing. Right now, we think that one of the, if not the most violent groups that we work with is the youngest group, right? And so when we do these analyses, and so what we'll do is we'll go into a community and we'll find all of the groups that's in that community. So I'll just take Roseland as one community. So in Roseland, there's 50 different groups, right, that are in various conflicts. You know, you have some that may have five conflicts going on. You have others that may have only one. But the younger group that we're working with, a couple of them here, are in conflict with probably 30 other groups, right? And every time we go into these non-aggression agreements, the first thing they say is, "Can you get a hold of the younger group? Like, if you can get a hold of them, then we think that we could possibly come to the table." So yeah, we're finding that the younger the group, the younger the group is, the more riskier, the more risks they are willing to take.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I see that even with crime that you see now with a lot of the carjackings that are
Hmm.
going on and more of the violent crimes.
Hmm.
Seems like it's 15-year-olds, 14 year
Yeah.
olds. Like, so what can others do to help this?
Other than pray, you know, I have this saying when I say, if you care, then you're there, right? And so everybody could help in their own different ways, like, you know, whether it be mentoring, whether it be tutoring, whether it's financial, uh, whether it's trying to help to change the policies that create the conditions in these communities. I think everybody that has a vested interest in seeing not only a better Chicago, but a better world. You know, there's something out there that we can do, and it don't have to be a whole lot. Just do something.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and create opportunities, diversity and inclusion in
Exactly.
organizations. Try to have reform programs. I imagine, like, the more you can
Yeah.
create hope and opportunities, the more I would think chance that you have for people to take advantage of them.
Yeah. And you're from Chicago. You've been here, and so I tell people all the time, like, until we can make Fuller Park or Ogden Park look like Wicker Park and Lincoln Park, then we're going to continue to be fighting backwards, right? So they ask me, you know, how can we make the communities better? And I say, just go look at the communities that you feel are doing well and what made those communities thriving, and then come to those communities that aren't doing that well and provide those same opportunities. And then the closer that we can get to one Chicago or one community, the better off we'll be.
That's right on. That's great advice. So I want to end on another lighter note, because I think, well, one is I don't want to not say thank you for everything that you are doing for the Chicago community. I know I
Hmm.
started this off air by by saying that as well, but your story, Curtis, is incredible, and I give you a ton of kudos for changing your
Hmm.
life and for taking the path less traveled and being an inspiration to others to give them a path and to give them hope.
Yeah, I'm under the real belief that when you do good things happen for you. And we didn't, you know, really talk about it. I don't know if you saw it, but you know, I've never been an actor or writer or consultant. I'm acting and writing on the shy, being a consultant for a Showtime
That's a
series. So,
Yeah. Well, I was going to
so
ask you
you
about
know,
chi-raq and about some of that stuff, to
yeah,
close up.
I,
Yeah. It's
I
amazing.
was able to meet Spike Lee. He's one of my good friends. We're always in contact with each other. So, you know, I sit around the table sometimes with Lorraine Jobs, who's also a friend of mine. You know what I mean? So I just think, man, when you do good things happen for you. You know,
Yeah.
that's one of my mottos, man.
I was watching chi-raq yesterday. I saw you in it.
Yeah, have you watched The Shy?
Yeah. Yeah. I watched the shy of it too. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm also in there. You probably didn't notice me. I
Oh.
was a lot bigger, a lot bigger then. But yeah, man, it's just, you know, I think I have a obligation to give back. It's a thing that I ask myself, and I ask a lot of people when I'm having these conversations. Is that, you know, we could have been born in any century in any time, right? But we were born in this particular time, and what were we put on this earth to do in the time that we were born in? And I believe once you find that out, then the sky's the limit. And I think that, you know, why I was put here in this particular time was to go through what I went through, to be able to show people that you can go from that and still be okay, right? And you know, a lot of times, uh, earned what you earn instead of what you learn, or what you earn as well as what you learn. When you combine them, I think, people are able to really benefit from those kind of lessons.
Yeah. Amen, man. That's so true. And again, I just give you a ton of kudos. And I too am under that belief, and I've had good things happen in my life for trying to be a good human being. And I think that goes a lot further than people think.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I'd love to meet you in person at some point. I know we're not too far from one another.
Yeah, we got to meet, man. I'm thinking about, starting my own podcast down the line. So hopefully you can give me some,
Yeah, I
some
was gonna
help
say,
with that.
you got to do a podcast, your book. I mean, your stories are
Yeah.
incredible. I was looking for your book. I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, I've been told, again, like I say, when you do good things, good things happen for you. Like when I tell people that I'm represented by William Morris Endeavor, they like, wait a minute, how are they we're not even represented by them, but we're a big, we're this big to do. And it's kind
Yeah.
of like, it's not even like a formal partnership. It's just like me and one of the founders had a conversation, and she said that she would be willing to help me in any way possible and don't want to take any money. She just want to help me to do better. And
Yeah.
man, it just happened like that. Yeah.
That's great, man. Well, you are a good person, and you deserve the good things
I'm
that are
trying to
happening.
be.
Uh, just one more question as we wrap.
Mhm.
How old are your kids now?
Oh man, you put me on the spot. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think that headshot made me 24, 23, 21, and 18.
Okay. And do these still all live around the area?
I can't get rid of them, man. They all, instead of other than the
Yeah.
ones that's in college, I have my youngest, she's going to college this year, but they're still around, man, and I
Yeah.
love having them. I love having them. They keep me grounded.
Good deal. No, that's fantastic. Well, Curtis, thanks again, man, for the story, the lessons, and just you being an inspiration to the community. I can't thank you enough, my friend.
Thank you for having me. And, I believe that you're doing a great thing. I saw some of your other episodes on Not Almost There, man. And just keep doing your thing and keep helping folks and keep getting these stories out to hopefully inspire others.
Definitely. Thank you.